essential in my life. Hello. I hope you've got my email with the material, those who asked for it. Okay, great. And then I thought, because some of the files that I will want to share with you are quite large, maybe what I'll do is share a link to a Dropbox folder, and then even if you don't have Dropbox, you can access it just via the link and download whatever articles you're interested in. Otherwise, if you have problem accessing them, just email me and I'll make a plan. So today we're finally honing in on the main focus of this course. So we took our time to get there. I still, again, have a little bit of backlog from yesterday, which is two notions that I found useful. One is by an author who's based in South Africa. And the notion, her name is Miambo, her surname. And the notion, I listed that as a suggested reading, so you might be familiar with it already. But if not, then at the center of her argument about gentrifying cities and the way in which gentrification coincides in South African cities with racial segregation, or the remaining topography of racial segregation, is the idea or the observation that that type of cultural or aesthetic uniformism or uniformality that we talked about over the past two lectures is important for the function that global cities, that gentrifying global cities perform, and this sort of uniformality, this experiential uniformality, allows for performing the same kind of social and economic transactions in these various cities, no matter where they are on the globe. And this phenomenon she calls global cultural time zones. I'm not sure how helpful the idea or the word time zone is in this case, but really what she is getting at is that wherever you are on the globe, because in these global cities and their gentrifying aesthetics, you are able to have similar kinds of social interactions, similar kinds of experiences, and importantly, because of the infrastructure that is believed to be necessary to create a global city, you are able to perform the same kind of economic transactions as well. So the experiential uniformality that characterizes these cities have a function that goes beyond the experience itself. And then within this context, she's looking at how gentrification manifests as what she calls hipsterification. So the spatial transformation that alludes to or that appeals to those who we refer to as hipsters. Hipster is an interesting category if we remember yesterday when I talked about how in that case in Chicago, the anthropologist Richard Lloyd observed the distinction that artists made between themselves as bohemians, although they didn't necessarily refer to themselves as bohemians, but they definitely referred to the other as the yuppie. Hipster is an interesting category because you hardly ever see anyone labeling them or hear anyone labeling themselves as hipster, but we are all very happy to point out how everyone else or a lot of other people are hipsters. So again, this is an interesting kind of sociology or popular sociology, I guess, that we can perceive in our own or reflect in our own practice of living in the city. And then The other helpful notion that I wanted to talk about was art washing, which is a new derivative similar to whitewashing a space, so art washing a space. And this was a label that was mobilized in a campaign in, why do I always forget these locations? That's crazy. Okay. It is in an American state. I'm going to have to look that up. I do have notes. Sorry about that. Yay. Heights, Boyle Heights, sorry, in Los Angeles. Boyle Heights has become famous for its campaign where local activists basically decided to stop the in-migration or the emergence of art galleries and further art spaces in their districts and neighborhoods. And so every time there was either a new gallery opening or an exhibition or some other artistic event, they showed up in numbers and protested and basically claimed that as local activists, as activists who mobilize for the right of housing, for low or for working class communities, they do not want these art spaces to operate in their neighborhood. And of course that became a very controversial issue because some of the spaces that they protested against were there for over 30 years. And not only were they there as their location, but they actively engaged with the local community, and some of the artists who were definitely part of the local community, even the local Latino community, defended these spaces, saying, you know, targeting artists and these cultural spaces is not what you have to do. What your essential aim should be the developer. But it created a very interesting and productive conversation, because as much as I think a lot of the activists were aware of the fact that it's the investor that is their main target, this was a very productive or fruitful or visible enough route to get their message out there. So sometimes instrumental tactics like this are useful when you mobilize against much more powerful actors. But then I'll send you the links to these conversations as well, because then in response, a cultural critic, I think, claimed, and there are lots of people who agree with him, that as much as we have observed over the past few decades how artists are often the avant-garde of gentrification, it would be foolish to now purge them out of these neighborhoods, because when culture arrives or flourishes in an area, that brings cultural, social, ethnic, etc. diversity. So this is clearly not an easy point to, or not an easy argument to decide. Certainly one has to know the local circumstances and, of course, what kind of relationships the art world actually has to, the local art world has to developers. In many cases in Boyle Heights, the activists could prove that one or other gallery is funded by the major investors who want to bulldoze low-cost housing, and so yeah, there was both. Okay, so art washing and hipsterification, or more helpfully perhaps global cultural time zones. From yesterday. And then today, like I said, we finally arrived to the topic of public art. which is of course much larger than public art that's relevant for a discussion about gentrification. But I will try to keep it focused so that I can share a lot of the interventions with you, and we can perhaps talk about those more. However, just to give you very basic definitions, public art is best thought of as artwork that's located in public spaces. So artwork that is placed, installed in public spaces. Now, what are public spaces? Public spaces are areas that, at least in principle, are accessible to anyone and everyone. So it's a very, very broad definition. Some, especially those who work from cities in the global south, namely Rika Sitas, my colleague at the African Center for Cities, argues that actually in these regions it's not so helpful to think of public art as art installed in public spaces, because socially and even spatially the division between public and private is not as relevant. So the notion that she uses instead is public-facing art, and here public refers to the people, the collective political social subject. So public-facing art, of course, always has enormous cultural and social power, or at least that's what artists and cultural policymakers would like us to think. Which is why, to jump quickly to South Africa and its last couple decades, post-democratization, public art has definitely been attributed this function of, a function, and I think that is already enough if we take note of the fact that politicians and cultural policymakers attribute a function to art, right? That doesn't necessarily have to have a goal beyond itself if we're talking about artworks, but definitely those responsible for cultural policy in South Africa thought and still think of public art as one of the instruments that can be mobilized for reconciliation. And not only for reconciliation, but for tipping the balance or compensating for the very monocultural landscape of public art in South Africa. So because of the way regime change happened, I'm sure I don't have to go into much detail for this audience, but iconoclasm or the destruction of previous artwork did not happen in the name of, or the removal, not necessarily the destruction of monuments of the previous regime, didn't happen in the spirit of reconciliation. That, of course, has a major impact on the current public art landscape in our cities, which is why I think it's significant that the most important social movement of the past years, which is the student movement, Rhodes Must Fall, and then following that, Fees Must Fall, erupted on the apropos of a public artwork, and that was the Rhodes statue. So what I wanted to say is that there is an existing public art landscape that represents the culture of the previous oppressor, and so whatever public art interventions are sanctioned by the current state operate in that scenery, which defines the way in which they think about what public art has to be today. And in the name of reconciliation and building the nation, the idea behind sanctioning public art is that it has to be widely accessible. So the idea of popular accessibility is one of the central ideas, and that its cultural references are either that of the black majority, which is something that can hardly be contested, or absolutely widely accessible to everyone. So symbols or subject matters that everyone can supposedly relate to. So let me start showing, I don't even know how many slides I have, a lot. So one such artwork in Cape Town is Brett Murray's Africa, which is slightly more critical than the one that follows after this, because it speaks to popular culture and supposed symbols of what Africa is, but it definitely ticks the box of accessibility. This one is a more recent installation. It's in Johannesburg. It's quite typical of this idea of topics and symbols that everyone can relate to. Nature and animals are a very productive resource for that in that regard. We'll see a repetition of that later as well. Okay, this is already something else. So the idea of heritage is at the center of creating and curating public arts interventions in South Africa these days. And of course, beyond these widely accessible artworks, another aim is, of course, to memorialize the atrocities of the previous regime, and that it would be a lie to say that these ones dominate over these other more politically minded interventions. One such that memorializes the atrocities of the apartheid regime is this one, which is interestingly unassuming if you look at it. It's the Trojan Horse Memorial in Athlone. Was installed in 2005, and it memorializes the murder of 4 young activists who died during the student, so very widespread resistant movement, but certainly in Athlone and around there, student activism and school boycotts were the most significant political conflicts or those moments which are remembered and are being memorialized today in these areas. There are people who say this is a better photo. What I wanted also to mention, the reason why this one is a significant memorial is that the graffiti was a grassroots initiative. So someone before the artwork was installed spray painted, "Remember the Trojan Horse Massacre," Sean, Michael, Jonathan, and the 4th person who was killed by the police in this ambush massacre. And then the sculpture that was installed, I mean, the location was defined by this graffiti, so that's why they chose the location. Okay, sorry, this is, I think I'll have to actually skip those ones, but we'll see. So there are some namely Premesh Lalu from the Center for Humanities Research, who argues that despite the enormous value of these kinds of public art, which memorializes the history that hasn't been told previously, what happens through them, or as a backlash of this process, that these tragedies are memorialized at particular places, namely the townships are still townships, even if they aren't supposed to be, but black areas, or areas where black people live, or areas where these political activities took place, and in turn that results in attaching a deadly narrative to these spaces. So through the exclusive memorialization of tragedies, the productive, the imaginative, the joyful cultural production of these areas isn't being put into the canon, which I think is a relevant and important point. Another, to backtrack a little bit, or to zoom out and talk about public art, or definitions of public art. Public art is normally, or often traditionally thought of as art that is sanctioned or curated by an official actor. And then street art is defined against it normally. Street art is normally thought of course, as resistant, as dissident, as militant. But another important distinction that appeared in the last quarter of the 20th century was a different kind of, or an idea of public art that was also dissident, in the sense that, as opposed to the monumental nature, the monumental character of public art, where the audience, the people, the public are expected to only engage with the artwork as its audience, in the late 20th century, participatory art became increasingly important, and that in all genres, but in public art that produced the notion of new genre public art. So it's a category that you'll find if you read up on public art, new genre public art, which refers to non-monumental, often temporary or ephemeral public art, but definitely, and most importantly, public art that has a concept of social change. And in this idea, or in this vision of public art should be a form of critique. Public art is a critical, creative practice. A lot of the artists, creative people who work with this idea of public art draw on critical pedagogist Paulo Freire's work from Brazil, and think of how as cultural activists, artists can intervene, artists can further social transformation. And so even in the South African or Capetonian public art landscape, that change or that idea appeared very soon after democratization, when artists and everyone, the public, was beginning to... Do you have a question? So, okay, no problem. When the sense of disappointment about the effects or the non-effects of the regime change started to bubble up, and that was around the early to mid 2000s. And so artists started to challenge both the memorialization the state-sanctioned memorialization of the past of the apartheid regime, but also, and this is where we're coming closer to our topic, also the persisting spatial character of the city and the persisting inequality that sustains the spatial inequality. And so this is a set of ephemeral artworks that took place under the auspices of a public art festival. I think an explicitly new genre public art festival called Returning the Gaze. And a lot of the artworks were on billboards. So they chose this very ubiquitous feature of the urban landscape. And this is one of them where, by Donovan Ward, where we can see on the right-hand side the colorful image of the essential African experience. And the sunset, also on the far right, a surfer. So all the kind of pleasures of Cape Town as a tourist destination are on the right-hand side in color, and then a smaller black and white bit of the billboard features a woman with her baby and some gang tagging on the bottom as well. So this is, I'm sorry that I'm spoon feeding the interpretation here for you, but it's essentially a very straightforward visualization of inequality and the two sides of the coin that is Cape Town. Any questions? Okay.
Hi, so some of the research from applicability cities, are people looking at the relationship between the artists, the programs that are facilitating the gentrification, like let's say the open streets, and the kind of resistance art, so like the Tickle-Laws group that spray paint some horrible names.
We'll get to that.
I just want to say what I'm, in the sense from Cape Town, or my experience in the East scene, except for the issue around people being displaced or evicted from their houses, that kind of raised the debate a little bit of the gentrification. A more deeper political engagement of what's happening seems to be kind of void or not happening. And so the spaces are quite depoliticized by these facilitated engagements. The open streets, whatever, open streets. Yeah.
Well, I personally try to conduct research on art that's more dissident. And Rika Sitas, my colleague, was instrumental in a series of events called Power of Place, which had lots of quite progressively minded public art interventions. So I'm happy to send you info about that, and you can, so and a lot of them took place in township areas, or engaged with supported cultural activities that are already going on in Khayelitsha and Philippi and other areas. So there is awareness, and I think there is research being conducted as well. I'm not sure about the open streets. I'm not sure if anyone is engaging with that. The open streets is, it can be controversial, but anyways, let's chat. I don't want to take, I think we should just have a one-on-one. All right, we will get to Tokolos though. I'm going to finish with them. This is another kind of really interesting public art intervention. Quite early on, in 1999, there was a public art project that took place in District 6 that took civil society initiative to engage with the displacement and continued dispossession in District 6, in that a lot of it was or took place in that vast empty area that's largely still empty. And this one by Belinda Clark was a signpost, as you can see what remained of it, pointing to, so a simple signpost pointing to all those areas to which people were removed from District 6. So the so-called colored population were removed from District 6, sometimes as far as Atlantis, which is about 40 kilometers from the center, and I don't have to describe what it is. What you can see in the photo is that people at the festival already engaged with the artwork, which was the idea. And because you can see that some of the signs are left there, so it wasn't vandalism because people wanted to take the bits and pieces of the signpost. It was genuine interaction, most probably, with the artwork, manifesting anger over the nature of the display and the consequences of displacement. And then this is another kind of dissident intervention or dissident engagement with the sort of public art landscape that we still have in this city. This statue, despite everything, is still there in front of Parliament, of Luis Bota. And in this rendering, he is a close-up young man returning from initiation. So he's dressed up by the artist Beezy Bailey as someone that has more relevance or resonance to the majority of people living in Cape Town. Although, anyways, the majority of Cape Town is certainly black, not necessarily Xhosa, but that's not significant at the moment. It's just a very interesting and creative and actually controversial intervention into what is the heritage that we still encounter every single day in this city. This one is another instance of, as opposed to move between opposites, another instance of a much less controversial artwork from the Sea Point Promenade. It's called Rhinosaur. And so the issue of rhinos in South African society is a very interesting one, because it's a cause that a lot of people mobilize for who aren't necessarily touched by injustices inflicted on human beings, but certainly rhinos. I'm not saying that this artwork is of that sentiment, but it's an instance of the type of artwork that doesn't directly engage with sociocultural issues of human animals. And then, so I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but give you a background zooming out. This is another famous and infamous public artwork also on the Sea Point Promenade. Just let me give you a little bit of artwork to give substance to what I'm saying. So the artwork is from 2014, which was the year of the World Design Capital, or when Cape Town was the World Design Capital. That bid was a very interesting one, or the whole the fact that Cape Town applied and how it applied is very interesting and relevant for our discussion of gentrification in the city, or gentrification in Cape Town. The World Design Capital bid was placed by or submitted by a branch or a sub-organization of the Cape Town Partnership that I talked about yesterday, which was that public-private unit that was that had a crucial role in reconstructing the CBD. This branch or sub-organization was called Creative Cape Town. And Creative Cape Town got 2 million rands from the city to create the campaign for World Design Capital. And then acquired 4 more million from private investors to advertise and support and gain public appreciation or acknowledgement of the project. Their bid was successful, and as I'm sure many of you know, Cape Town did become the World Design Capital in 2014. The arguments for this bid were interesting again and very much in line with what we were talking about already over the past 2 lectures. Quite in line also with Richard Florida's argument. So the idea of those who were for the bid was that Cape Town is already a creative city, but if we make it even more so, that will help attract money. That was the more instrumental argument, but it will also help to create a new and common vision for this city. So on the one hand, proponents of the bid just wanted the kind of prosperity that Florida promises. If you manage to lure the creative class, then the city will prosper. But on the other hand, the concept of design that the bid centered on was infused by the hope that through focusing on design, Cape Town will be able to, or Capetonians, professionals, common people, whoever will be able to articulate a new vision that will finally be able to rewrite or start a new chapter of our history. And more specifically, the kind of design that they promoted or the way they conceptualized Cape Town as the World Design Capital was socially responsive design. So socially responsive design is the design equivalent of socially engaged art, to remain in our context. And the idea is that designers, creative professionals can come up with ideas that are not only aesthetically pleasing or not necessarily aesthetically pleasing, but perform a function that empowers, that facilitates getting closer to social and economic equality. One of the examples that one of the central figures of Creative Cape Town cites is an organization called VPUU, Violence Prevention Against Violence Prevention with Urban Upgrading, or through urban upgrading. Violence prevention through or with urban upgrading. VPUU is an organization that used to be part of the city, but is now more independent, but fights crime or helps communities fighting crime by remapping, recreating public spaces, intervening in public spaces in areas that that are pervaded by high proportion or high extent of crime. And so that was one of the examples in which design can intervene and empower. The argument against this sort of rendering of design was by an artist and also urban scholar who, drawing on other experiences of people engaging and critiquing this sort of design, was that on the one hand, like a lot of public art, design here is approached very instrumentally, whereas not every creative work should have a utility beyond being aesthetically pleasing, but also and more strongly, if we think of design as something that can be the instrument of realizing social and economic justice, that glosses over the fact that social and economic justice needs intervention, needs much more structural intervention. Design itself is not able to inflict weighty enough change in society. So this argument says that it's quite an illusion to appropriate that much power to design, and instead we should focus on the kind of structural changes that should be necessary to really create an equal society, and the possibilities for substantial reconciliation. I have this pro and counter argument that I'll also share with you. So this pair of huge Ray-Bans was part of the one of the artworks realized through the World Design Capital series, or under the auspices, although later it turned out that Ray-Ban also had some funding available for it. No wonder. And so the idea of artist Michael Ellen was that this pair of sunglasses, which faces Robben Island, which is, of course, the prison island where Nelson Mandela with other freedom fighters were imprisoned for decades. So looking at Robben Island, this pair of glasses will help society see beyond their prejudices. I'm not joking. This was the pitch for the. So these glasses should help us see better and see the reality and go beyond the categories that underlie social and cultural inequality, which is why he titled the piece "Perceiving Freedom." But not everyone thought this was a good idea. And so this is Tokolo's collective, Stencil Collective, who I think the following day made their marks. And on the sides of the glasses, they put myopic art, which is also very funny, I think. You see, we broke your hearts, but at the center of the two lenses is one of their most present stencils, which says "Remember Marikana," and it features one of the icons of the Marikana massacre. Mambush Noki, this is the stencil that, especially during or around the anniversary of the Marikana massacre, the collective still stencils up at various points of the city, and then they routinely disappear. So he was one of the fallen miners who wore a green blanket and was very visible through that, through media reports. I want to now move on through or via the work of Tokolo Stencil to works that address consequences of gentrification, or more directly attack gentrification in Cape Town. But I do want to say that as much as gentrification is a process that is definitely present in this city, it's important, and I think Tokolo Stencil's work draws attention to the fact that a lot of the processes that sustain inequality and inhuman conditions and sustain the spatial segregation of the city have less to do with gentrification than other economic social processes and their spatial consequences.
Can I just say something?
Sure.
So in our own research on this, I found that while the sculpture by Malcolm wasn't inherently bad, the problem came in that his original proposal, which was an exact replica of a 2011 art that we made in Denmark, was actually the Hemisphere Beach, which is a very different space. It's a more playful space than the Sea Point Promenade. And the work that appeared on the promenade with that whole Ward 54 for that whole area, there was a loophole in the funding and legislation process. So basically a lot of those artists didn't necessarily have the amount of money they would have needed to see that their artworks were realized. So they had to seek external funding. And I think it's a very good example of gentrification, but it also just makes me wonder, I don't know what you think about this, but if the problem isn't with the artists, A, not really belonging to the area or understanding the racial or the diverse history, and B, the board itself or the commissions or the city or the government, the people who get together to establish public art projects and how that fits into gentrification and improvement district policies, actually really look at the space and make sure that there is appropriate funding so that it can be, like you said, that social commentary, because I think this is a very good example of where the initiative was good and works like the Rhinosaur are fun and they're playful and they're thought-provoking and works in the space people can interact with. But this was a lofty linkage, and I mean, anyone who knows Mandela's history knows that he was denied sunglasses for 3 years while working on the limestone quarry. So to create a pair of Ray-Bans pointing out towards Robben Island is inherently incredibly insensitive. And I think it's also just an important part of how we can move forward if we are going to gentrify, but do it in a more well thought out way, in a way that isn't necessarily not sustainable.
Yeah, so I think you make a very good point there about the importance of knowledgeable curation, which is essential, and I think has been one of the conclusions of processes closer to home here and in the library about, for example, or related to the Sarah Bartman statue. curation and good curation is essential. But I think, you yourself mentioned why this should not have been put up. The artist should have realized that this is not the right spot for it. And as much as I sympathize with artists and understand, and that's another thing that I wanted to underline. The last thing I want you to take away is that artists are bad people and the destructive agents of our cities. The artists themselves are usually poor and lack funding and have to do everything to be able to continue with their profession, although not Michael Ellen, who has some other very prominent public art in this city. So I don't think he really needed to have this installed somewhere, and he could have said, no, I'm not doing this, and make a campaign around that and point out why he's not doing it and what kind of problems would emerge. So he really just opened himself up to these kind of reactions. And I'm not sure I would call this the gentrification of the Sea Point Promenade. I think it's part of a broader problem of how public culture is dealt with in the city today. And I am aware of efforts to change that, but it's an incredibly slow process, but it should, and it tries to be more mindful of risks such like this. So yeah, I think punchline curation, but unfortunately the way that the kind of place that culture and public art and engaging with public spaces more generally has in city budgets and policy making is so marginal that often it really isn't the right kind of people that manage to influence what and how appears in public spaces. I have no idea where I was, but I'm going to show you. So I was talking about the necessity to think beyond gentrification in the processes that keep this city the way it is. And Tokolos, in a playful and quite controversial way, do this by for example, re-rendering the city's symbols and emblems, logos. So the motto of Cape Town that we see everywhere is this city works for you. But according to Tokolos, this city only works for a few. And they went around and stenciled up this sign, not only in central places. There used to be a Ferrari store on Ruland Street, and they also put "This city works for a few" on there. But then the Ferrari store relocated. Guess where? Do you know? In the Silo district, or whatever it's called. So it's moving with the money for sure. The Silo district is also a very important area if we want to investigate gentrification or urban change. I wanted to mention the the Silo district is, of course, at the center of it is the new Museum of Contemporary African Art, which is a beautiful, magnificent building and fantastic that we have a museum like that. But of course, there's lots of criticism attached to it. But it interestingly reversed some of the dynamics that we have been talking about. I forgot to mention this yesterday. On the one hand, the location is an old grain silo, so that industrial aesthetic is there. It utilizes it. It's part of or it can be compared to similar processes elsewhere. However, part of the funding that it uses for the museum comes from the super fancy apartments that are above the museum. So in a way, it as opposed, or well, playing with or engaging with this dynamic of how art brings money through tenants that are not artists or not creative professionals, at least it tries to take advantage of that and fund some of the artworks or the operation of the museum through this desire or through this aesthetic of loft living. Again, toilets in, I wonder, I think this is, well, my guess is Sweet Home Farm, but I might very well be wrong. This is another of their stencils playing with the Cape Town logo, which they often sprayed up in relocation areas, such as Blikkiesdorp, temporary relocation areas where people who, well, either their shacks are burnt and need temporary accommodation, but more than that, or rather than that, people who are removed from areas that are being redeveloped end up in places such as Blikkiesdorp. The people who are fighting relocation from Bromwell Street, which is just behind the biscuit mill in Woodstock, would be housed in temporary relocation areas.
What are the original words?
I don't think there is, I'm not aware of what it would be, but it plays with the logo, the City of Cape Town logo. This I showed you. This is one of the instances of the Remember Marikana stencil. And here too. I thought that was a powerful image. And then I'm going to have to finish, but of course, often there is a conversation about the power and role of street art in relation to gentrification. Street art, like I said in the beginning, is mostly thought of as dissident, as intervening from the ground into the city, but recently people have started to raise concerns that very often, parallel to the process of creative interventions playing into gentrification, being part of the upgrading process, the rehabilitation process of certain gentrifying areas, street art becomes complicit in furthering gentrification. There are beautiful murals appearing in gentrifying areas which make it more hip, more attractive. You can go on street art tours in Woodstock, for example. Some of the street art that you will see there has been commissioned by private companies, coffee shops, etc. Other are not, so there's still dissident and illegal art happening. But it's very true that, as we saw yesterday on the Pam Golding ad, the street art of Gympie Street is now becoming one of the selling points of Salt River or Woodstock. So it is part of the label, part of the brand. And so there's a huge conversation among street artists, of course not only here, but in other global cities, about whether, or asking whether street art has sold out to corporate interests, whether these murals are now playing into the processes of gentrification. Again, I have too many gadgets here, but So one of the emblematic street art pieces that emerged in Cape Town and Johannesburg actually was by artist Faith 47, dedicated to the Freedom Charter. I included this link here, which you can follow, and there's quite a nice video featuring all the other bits from the Freedom Charter. This one is in Khayelitsha. The people shall share in the country's wealth, which is, I think, quite a nice reminder after democratization of what that fight was about. And of course, we can debate the positionality of Faith 47, but I personally think that this series was a politically minded one, as opposed to this one, which is a more recent work of hers, which won, this one is in Sandton, Johannesburg. It won a street art award, and there's a huge elephant, and we can think back to those public artworks that I talked about earlier, and the whole Big Five craze defining South Africa. But of course, I mean, this photo is not as revealing as this one. Sorry?
Is that a projection?
No, it's a huge graffiti. It's a mural, and it's on one of the walls of a new hotel called Signature Hotel Lux, or Signature Lux Hotel in Sandton, and so probably one of her less political artworks. Gosh, I'm so sorry I ran out of time. Do you have a little more? I want to show you the best stuff is still to come. I'm gonna go through quickly. So this set of wheat paste that I will show now is by artist collective called the Burning Museum. They mostly are from Woodstock, or definitely are based in Cape Town. And well, this one is similar to Tokolo's stencils Dehumanization Zone, bringing together archival footage and placing these kids in the background of Blicky's dorp, or the temporary relocation area setting. This project, these series of wheat pastes were, I wanted to include them and talk to you about them because they counter precisely that sort of erasure or amnesia that I mentioned yesterday, and that Duke and Lex represent as real estate agents. What they did was they went to the District 6 Museum and dug up the archives of this photographer and tried to do research on where the people who were photographed were, where they used to live, and tried to put these pastes up there, or at least nearby, with the aim to bring these faces back into Woodstock and counter the erasure. So this was a photographer operating in Woodstock since the 1930s, and there's a huge archive of family photos in the District 6 Museum. So that was one part of the project, but usually